Sam Vimes sighed when he heard the scream, but he finished shaving before he did anything about it. Then he put his jacket on and strolled out into the wonderful late spring morning. Birds sang in the trees, bees buzzed in the blossom. The sky was hazy, though, and thunderheads on the horizon threatened rain later. But for now, the air was hot and heavy. And in the old cesspit behind the gardener's shed, a young man was treading water. Well, treading anyway. Vimes stood back a little way and lit a cigar. It probably wouldn't be a good idea to employ a naked flame any nearer to the pit. The fall from the shed roof had broken the crust. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Good morning, Your Grace," said the industrious Treadler. The voice was higher pitched than Vimes expected, and he realised that most unusually the young man in the pit was in fact a young woman. It wasn't entirely unexpected. The Assassin's Guild was aware that women were at least equal to their brothers when it came to inventive killing, but it nevertheless changed the situation somewhat. "I don't believe we've met," said Vimes, "although I see you know who I am. You are—" "Wiggs, sir," said the swimmer. "Jocasta Wiggs. Honoured to meet you, Your Grace." "Wiggs, eh?" said Vimes. "Famous family in the guild. Sir will do, by the way. I think I once broke your father's leg." "Yes, sir. He asked to be remembered to you," said Jocasta. "You're a bit young to be sent on this contract, aren't you?" said Vimes. "Not a contract, sir," said Jocasta, still paddling. "Come now, Miss Wiggs. The price on my head is at least—" "The Guild Council put it in abeyance, sir," said the patient swimmer. "You're off the register. They're not accepting contracts on you at present." "Good grief. Why not?" "Couldn't say, sir," said Miss Wiggs. Her patient struggles had brought her to the edge of the pit, and now she was finding that the brickwork was in very good repair, quite slippery, and offered no handholds. Vimes knew this, because he'd spent several hours one afternoon carefully arranging that this should be so. "So, why were you sent then?" "Miss Band sent me as an exercise," said Jocasta. "I say, these bricks really are jolly tricky, aren't they?" "Yes," said Vimes, "they are. Have you been rude to Miss Band lately? Upset her in any way?" "Oh, no, Your Grace, but she did say I was getting overconfident and would benefit from some advanced field work." "Ah, I see." Vimes tried to recall Miss Alice Band, one of the Assassin's Guild's stricter teachers. She was, he'd heard, very hot on practical lessons. "So, she sent you to kill me then?" he said. "No, sir, it's an exercise. I don't even have any crossbow bolts. I just had to find a spot where I could get you in my sights and then report back." "She'd believe you?" "Of course, sir," said Jocasta, looking rather hurt. "Guild honour, sir." Vimes took a deep breath. "You see, Miss Wiggs, quite a few of your chums have tried to kill me at home in recent years. As you might expect, I take a dim view of this." "Easy to see why, sir," said Jocasta, in the voice of one who knows that their only hope of escaping from their present predicament is reliant on the goodwill of another person who has no pressing reason to have any. "And so you'd be amazed at the traps there are around the place," Vimes went on. "Some of them are pretty cunning, even if I say it myself." "I certainly never expected the tiles on the shed to shift like that, sir." "They're on greased rails," said Vimes. "Well done, sir." "And quite a few of the traps drop you into something deadly," said Vimes. "Lucky for me that I fell into this one, eh, sir?" "Oh, that one's deadly too," said Vimes. "Eventually deadly." He sighed. He really wanted to discourage this sort of thing, but they'd put him off the register. It wasn't that he liked being shot at by hooded figures in the temporary employ of his many and varied enemies, but he'd always looked at it as some kind of vote of confidence. It showed that he was annoying the rich and arrogant people who ought to be annoyed. Besides, the Assassin's Guild was easy to outwit. They had strict rules, which they followed quite honourably, and this was fine by Vimes, who in certain practical areas had no rules whatsoever. Off the register, eh? The only other person not on it any more, it was rumoured, was Lord Vetinari, the patrician. The assassins understood the political game in the city better than anyone, and if they took you off the register, it was because they felt your departure would not only spoil the game, but also smash the board. "I'd be jolly grateful if you could pull me out, sir," said Jocasta. "What? Oh, yeah, sorry, got clean clothes on," said Vimes. "But when I get back to the house, I'll tell the butler to come down here with a ladder. How about that?" "Thank you very much, sir. Nice to have met you, sir." Vimes strolled back to the house. Off the register. Was he allowed to appeal? Perhaps they thought... The scent rolled over him. He looked up. Overhead, a lilac tree was in bloom. He stared. Damn, damn, damn! Every year he forgot. Well, no, he never forgot. He just put the memories away like old silverware he didn't want to tarnish. And every year they came back, sharp and sparkling, and stabbed him in the heart. And on today of all days. He reached up, and his hands trembled as he grasped a bloom and gently broke the stem. He sniffed at it. He stood for a moment, staring at nothing. And then he carried the sprig of lilac carefully back up to his dressing room. Willikins had prepared the official uniform for today. Sam Vimes stared at it blankly, and then remembered. Watch committee, right. The battered old breastplate wouldn't do, would it? Not for His Grace the Duke of Ankh, Commander of the City Watch, Sir Samuel Vimes. Lord Vetinari had been very definite about that, blast it. Blast it all the more because, unfortunately, Sam Vimes could see the point. He hated the official uniform, but he represented a bit more than just himself these days. Sam Vimes had been able to turn up for meetings in grubby armour, and even Sir Samuel Vimes could generally contrive to find a way to stay in street uniform at all times. But a duke, well, a duke needed a bit of polish. A duke couldn't have the arse hanging out of his trousers when meeting foreign diplomats. Actually, even plain old Sam Vimes had never had the arse hanging out of his trousers either, but no one would have actually started a war if he had. The plain old Sam Vimes had fought back. He got rid of most of the plumes and the stupid tights and ended up with a dress uniform that at least looked as though its owner was male. But the helmet had gold decoration, and the bespoke armourers had made a new, gleaming breastplate with useless gold ornamentation on it. Sam Vimes felt like a class traitor every time he wore it. He hated being thought of as one of the people that wore stupid ornamental armour. It was guilt by association. He twirled the sprig of lilac in his fingers and smelled again the heady smell. Yes, it hadn't always been like this. Someone had just spoken to him. He looked up. "What?" he barked. "I inquired of her ladyship as well, Your Grace," said the butler, looking startled. "Are you feeling all right, Your Grace?" "What? Oh, yeah, no, I'm fine. So is her ladyship, yes, thank you. I popped in before I went outside. Mrs. Content is with her. She says it won't be for a while. I have advised the kitchen to have plenty of hot water ready, Your Grace, nevertheless," said Willikins, helping Vimes on with the guilty breastplate. "Yes. Why do they need all that water, do you think?" "I couldn't say, Your Grace," said Willikins. "Probably best not to inquire." Vimes nodded. Sybil had already made it quite clear, with gentle tact, that he was not required on this particular case. It had been, he had to admit, a bit of a relief. He handed Willikins the sprig of lilac. The butler took it without comment, inserted it into a little silver tube of water that would keep it fresh for hours, and fixed it onto one of the breastplate straps. "Time moves on, doesn't it, Your Grace?" he said, dusting him down with a small brush. Vimes took out his watch. "It certainly does. Look, I'll drop in at the yard on my way to the palace, sign what needs signing, and I'll be back as soon as possible, all right?" Willikins gave him a look of almost unbutlery concern. "I'm sure her ladyship will be fine, Your Grace," he said. "Of course, she is not young," said Vimes. "I would say she is richer in years than many other prima gravidia," said Willikins smoothly. "But she is a well-built lady, if you don't mind me saying so, and her family have traditionally had very little trouble in the childbirth department." "Prima what?" "New mothers, Your Grace. I'm sure her ladyship would much rather know that you were running after miscreants than wearing a hole in the library carpet. I expect you're right, Willikins. Yes, there's a young lady dog-paddling in the old cesspit, Willikins. Very good, Your Grace. I shall send the kitchen boy down there with a ladder directly. The message to the Assassin's Guild? Good idea. She'll need clean clothes and a bath. I think, perhaps, the hose in the old scullery might be more appropriate, Your Grace, to start with at least. Good point. See to it. And now I must be off. In the crowded main office of the Pseudopolis Yard watch house, Sergeant Colon absent-mindedly adjusted the sprig of lilac that he'd stuck into his helmet like a plume. "They go very strange, Nobby," he said, leafing listlessly through the morning's paperwork. "It's a copper thing. Happened to me when I had kids. You get tough." "What do you mean, tough?" said Corporal Nobbs, possibly the best living demonstration that there was some smooth evolution between humans and animals. "Well," said Colon, leaning back in his chair, "it's like, well, when you're our age—" He looked at Nobby and hesitated. Nobby had been giving his age as probably 34 for years. The Nobbs family were not good at keeping count. "I mean, when a man reaches a certain age," he tried again, "he knows the world is never going to be perfect. He's got used to it being a bit... "Manky?" Nobby suggested. Tucked behind his ear, in the place usually reserved to his cigarette, was another wilting lilac flower. "Exactly," said Colon. "Like, it's never going to be perfect, so you just do the best you can, right? But when there's a kid on the way, well, suddenly a man sees it different. He thinks, my kid's going to have to grow up in this mess. Time to clean it up. Time to make it a better world. He gets a bit keen. Full of ginger. When he hears about strong in the arm, it's going to be very hot round here for morning, Mr. Vimes." "Talking about me, eh?" said Vimes, striding past them as they jerked to attention. He had not, in fact, heard any of the conversation, but Sergeant Colon's face could be read like a book, and Vimes had learned it by heart years ago. "Just wondering if the heavy event—" Colon began, trailing after Vimes as he took the stairs two at a time. "It hasn't," said Vimes shortly. He pushed open the door to his office. "Morning, Carrot." Captain Carrot sprang to his feet and saluted. "Morning, sir. Has Lady—" "No, Carrot, she has not. What's been happening overnight?" Carrot's gaze went to the sprig of lilac and back to Vimes's face. "Nothing good, sir," he said. "Another officer killed." Vimes stopped dead. "Oh," he demanded. "Sergeant strong in the arm, sir. Killed in Treaclemine Road. Carcer again." Vimes glanced at his watch. They had 10 minutes to get to the palace, but time suddenly wasn't important any more. He sat down at his desk. "Witnesses?" "3 this time, sir." "That many?" "All dwarfs. Strong in the arm wasn't even on duty, sir. He'd signed off and was picking up a rat pie and chips from a shop and walked straight out into Carcer. The devil stabbed him in the neck and ran for it. He must have thought we'd found him." "We've been looking for the man for weeks, and he bumped into poor old Strong in the arm when all the dwarf was thinking of was his breakfast. Is Angua on the trail?" "Up to a point, sir," said Carrot awkwardly. "Why only up to a point?" Well, we assume it was Carcer. Dropped an aniseed bomb in Sator Square. Almost pure oil." Vimes sighed. It was amazing how people adapted. The watch had a werewolf. That news had got around, in an underground kind of way, and so the criminals had evolved to survive in a society where the law had a very sensitive nose. Scent bombs were the solution. They didn't have to be that dramatic. You just dropped a little flask of pure peppermint or aniseed in the street where a lot of people would walk over it, and suddenly Sergeant Angua was facing 100, 1,000 crisscrossing trails and went to bed with a nasty headache. He listened glumly as Carrot reported on men brought off leave or put on double shift, on informers pumped, pigeons stooled, grasses rustled, fingers held to the wind, ears put on the street, and he knew how little it all added up to. They still had fewer than 100 men in the watch, and that was including the canteen lady. There were 1 million people in the city and 1 billion places to hide. Ankh-Morpork was built of bolt holes. Besides, Carcer was a nightmare. Vimes was used to the other kinds of nut jobs, the ones that acted quite normally right up to the point where they hauled off and smashed someone with a poker for blowing their nose noisily. But Carcer was different. He was in 2 minds, but instead of them being in conflict, they were in competition. He had a demon on both shoulders, urging one another on. And yet he smiled all the time, in a cheerful, chirpy sort of way, and he acted like the kind of rascal who made a dodgy living selling gold watches that go green after a week. And he appeared to be convinced, utterly convinced, that he never did anything really wrong. He'd stand there, amid the carnage, blood on his hands and stolen jewellery in his pocket, and with an expression of injured innocence declare, "Me? What did I do?" And it was believable, right up until you looked deep into those cheeky, smiling eyes and saw, deep down, the demons looking back. But don't spend too much time looking at those eyes, because that'd mean you'd taken your eyes off his hands, and by now one of them held a knife. It was hard for the average copper to deal with people like that. They expected people, when heavily outnumbered, to give in, or to try to deal, or at least just stop moving. They didn't expect people to kill for a $5 watch. A $100 watch now, that'd be different. This was Ankh-Morpork after all. "Was Strong in the Arm married?" he said. "No, sir. Lived in New Cobblers with his parents." Parents, thought Vimes, that made it worse. "Anyone been to tell him?" he said. "And don't say it was Nobby. We don't want any repeat of that bet you a dollar you're the Widow Jackson nonsense." "I went, sir, as soon as we got the news." "Thank you. They took it badly?" "They took it solemnly, sir." Vimes groaned. He could imagine the expressions. "I'll write them the official letter," he said, pulling open his desk. "Get someone to take it round, will you? And say I'll be over later. Perhaps this isn't the time to—" Oh, hold on, they were dwarfs. Dwarfs weren't bashful about money. "Forget that. Say we'll have all the details of his pension and so on. Died on duty too, that's extra. It all adds up. That'll be theirs." He rummaged in his cupboards. "Where's his file?" "Here, sir," said Carrot, handing it over smoothly. "We are due at the palace at 10, sir. Watch committee. But I'm sure they'll understand," he added, seeing Vimes's face. "I'll go and clean out Strong in the Arm's locker, sir, and I expect the lads will have a whip round for flowers and everything." Vimes pondered over a sheet of headed paper after the captain had gone. A file. He had to refer to a damned file. But there were so many coppers these days. A whip round for flowers and a coffin. You'd look after your own. Sergeant Dickens had said that a long time ago. He wasn't good with words, least of all ones written down, but after a few glances at the file to refresh his memory, he wrote down the best he could think of. And they were all good words, and more or less they were the right ones. But in truth, Strong in the Arm was just a decent dwarf who was paid to be a copper. He'd joined up because these days joining the watch was quite a good choice of career. The pay was good, there was a decent pension, there was a wonderful medical scheme, if you had the nerve to submit to Eagle's ministrations in the cellar, and, after a year or so, an Ankh-Morpork-trained copper could leave the city and get a job in the watches of other cities in the plain with instant promotion. That was happening all the time. Sammies, they were called, even in towns that had never heard of Sam Vimes. He was just a little proud of that. They meant watchmen who could think without their lips moving, who didn't take bribes much, and then only at the level of beer and donuts, which even Vimes recognised as the grease that helps the wheels run smoothly, and were, on the whole, trustworthy. For a given value of trust, at least. The sound of running feet indicated that Sergeant Detritus was bringing some of the latest trainees back from their morning run. He could hear the Jody Detritus had taught them. Somehow you could tell it was made up by a troll. "Now we sing this stupid song, sing it as we run along. Why we sing this we don't know, we can't make the words rhyme properly. Sound off, 1, 2, sound off, many, lots, sound off, what?" It still irked Vimes that the little training school in the old lemonade factory was turning out so many coppers who quit the city the moment their probation was up. But it had its advantages. There were Sammies almost as far as Uberwalds now, all speeding up the local promotion ladder. It helped, knowing names, and knowing that those names had been taught to salute him. The ebb and flow of politics often meant that the local rulers weren't talking to one another, but via the semaphore towers, the Sammies talked all the time. He realised he was humming a different song under his breath. It was a tune he'd forgotten for years. It went with the lilac, scent and song together. He stopped, feeling guilty. He was finishing the letter when there was a knock at the door. "Nearly done," he shouted. "It's me, sir," said Constable Igor, pushing his head around the door, and then he added, "Igor, sir." "Yes, Igor," said Vimes, wondering not for the first time why anyone with stitches all around his head needed to tell anyone who he was. The Igor employed by the watch as forensic specialist and medical aid was quite young, insofar as you could tell with an Igor, since useful limbs and other organs were passed on among Igors as others might hand on a pocket watch, and very modern in his thinking. He had a DA haircut with extended quiff, wore crepe soles, and sometimes forgot to lisp. "I would just like to say, sir, that I could have got young Strong in the Arm back on his feet, sir," said Igor, a shade reproachfully. Vimes sighed. Igor's face was full of concern, tinged with disappointment. He had been prevented from plying his craft. He was naturally disappointed. "We've been through this, Igor. It's not like sewing a leg back on, and dwarfs are dead set against that sort of thing." "There's nothing supernatural about it, sir. I'm a man of natural philosophy." "And he was still warm when they brought him in." "Those are the rules, Igor. Thanks all the same. We know your heart is in the right place." "They are in the right places, sir," said Igor reproachfully. "That's what I meant," Vimes said, without missing a beat, just as Igor never did. "Oh, very well, sir," said Igor, giving up. He paused and then said, "How is her ladyship, sir?" Vimes had been expecting this. It was a terrible thing for a mind to do, but his had already presented him with the idea of Igor and Sybil in the same sentence. Not that he disliked Igor, quite the reverse. There were watchmen walking around the streets right now who wouldn't have legs if it wasn't for Igor's genius with a needle, but... "Fine, she's fine," he said abruptly. "Only I heard that Mrs. Content was a bit Igor, there are some areas where... Look, do you know anything about women and babies?" "Not in so many words, sir, but I find that once I've got someone on the slab and had a good, rummage around, I can sort most things." Vimes's imagination actually shut down at this point. "Thank you, Igor," he managed, without his voice trembling, "but Mrs. Content is a very experienced midwife." "Just as you say, sir," said Igor, but doubt rode on the words. "And now I've got to go," said Vimes. "It's going to be a long day." He ran down the stairs, tossed the letter to Sergeant Colon, nodded to Carrot and set off at a fast walk for the palace. After the door had shut, one of the watchmen looked up from the desk where he'd been wrestling with the report and the effort of writing down as policemen do what ought to have happened. "Sarge?" "Yes, Corporal Ping." "Why are some of you wearing purple flowers, Sarge?" There was a subtle change in the atmosphere, a suction of sound caused by many pairs of ears listening intently. All the officers in the room had stopped writing. "I mean, I saw you and Reg and Nobby wearing 'em this time last year, and I wondered if we were all supposed to." Ping faltered. Sergeant Colon's normally amiable eyes had narrowed, and the message they were sending was, "You're on thin ice, lad, and it's starting to creak." "I mean, my landlady's got a garden, and I could easily go and cut her," Ping went on, in an uncharacteristic attempt at suicide. "You'd wear the lilac today, would you?" said Colon quietly. "I just meant that if you wanted me to, I could go and—" "Were you there?" said Colon, getting to his feet so fast that his chair fell over. "Steady, Fred," murmured Nobby. "I didn't mean—" Ping began. "I mean, was I where, Sarge?" Colon leaned on the desk, bringing his round, red face an inch away from Ping's nose. "If you don't know where there was, you weren't there," he said, in the same quiet voice. He stood up straight again. "Now, me and Nobby has got a job to do," he said. "At ease, Ping. We are going out." This was not being a good day for Corporal Ping. "Yes," said Colon. "Standing orders, Sarge. You're the ranking officer, you see, and I'm orderly officer for the day. I wouldn't ask otherwise, but if you're going out, Sarge, you've got to tell me where you're going, just in case anyone has to contact you, see. I've got to write it down in the book, in pen and everything," he added. "You know what day it is, Ping?" said Colon. 25th of May, Sarge." "And you know what that means, Ping?" It means," said Nobby, "that anyone important enough to ask where we're going—" "Knows where we've gone," said Fred Colon. The door slammed behind them. The Cemetery of Small Gods was for the people who didn't know what happened next. They didn't know what they believed in, or if there was life after death, and often they didn't know what hit them. They'd gone through life being amiably uncertain until the ultimate certainty had claimed them at the last. Among the city's bone orchards, the cemetery was the equivalent of the draw-marked misc, where people were interred in the glorious expectation of nothing very much. Most of the watch got buried there. Policemen, after a few years, found it hard enough to believe in people, let alone anyone they couldn't see. For once, it wasn't raining. The breeze shook the sooty poplars around the wall, making them rustle. "We ought to have brought some flowers," said Colon as they made their way through the long grass. "I could nick a few off some of the fresh graves, Sarge," Nobby volunteered. "Not the kind of thing I want to hear you saying at this time, Nobby," said Colon severely. "Sorry, Sarge." "At a time like this, a man ought to be thinking of his immortal soul, viz the endless mighty river that is history. I should do that if I was you, Nobby." "Right, Sarge, will do. I see someone's doing it already, Sarge." Up against one wall, lilac trees were growing. That is, at some point in the past, a lilac had been planted there and had given rise, as lilac will, to hundreds of whippy suckers, so that what had once been one stem was now a thicket. Every branch was covered in pale mauve blooms. The graves were still just visible in the tangled vegetation. In front of them stood Cut-Me-Own-Throat Dibbler, Ankh-Morpork's least successful businessman, with a sprig of lilac in his hat. He caught sight of the watchmen and nodded to them. They nodded back. All three stood looking down at the 7 graves. Only one had been maintained. The marble headstone on that one was shiny and moss-free. The turf was clipped, the stone border was sparkling. Moss had grown over the wooden markers of the other 6, but it had been scraped off the central one, revealing the name John Keel. And, carved underneath by someone who had taken some pains, was, "How do they rise up?" A huge wreath of lilac flowers, bound with purple ribbon, had been placed on the grave. On top of it, tied around with another piece of purple ribbon, was an egg. "Mrs. Palm and Mrs. Batty and some of the girls were up here earlier," said Dibbler, "and of course Madam always makes sure there's the egg." "It's nice the way they always remember," said Sergeant Colon. The three stood in silence. They were not, on the whole, men with a vocabulary designed for times like this. After a while, though, Nobby felt moved to speak. "He gave me a spoon once," he said to the air in general. "Yeah, I know," said Colon. "My dad pinched it off me when he came out of prison, but it was my spoon," said Nobby persistently. "That means a lot to a kid, your own spoon." "Come to that, he was the first person to make me a sergeant," said Colon. "Got busted again, of course, but I knew I could do it again then. He was a good copper." "He bought a pie off me. First week I was starting out," said Dibbler. Ate it all. Didn't spit out anything. There was more silence. After a while, Sergeant Colon cleared his throat, a general signal to indicate that some sort of appropriate moment was now over. There was a general relaxation of muscles. You know, we ought to come up here one day with a billhook and clear this lot up a bit, said the sergeant. You always say that, Sarge, every year, said Nobby as they walked away. And we never do. If I had $1 for every copper's funeral I've attended up here, said Colon, I'd have $19.50. 50 pence? Said Nobby. That was when Corporal Hildebiddle woke up just in time and banged on the lid, said Colon. That was before your time, of course. Everyone said it was an amazing recovery. Mr. Sergeant! The three men turned. Coming towards them in a high-speed sidle was the black-clad, skinny figure of legitimate First, the cemetery's resident gravedigger. Colon sighed. Yes, Ledgy, he said. Good morrow, sweet, the gravedigger began, but Sergeant Colon waved a finger at him. Stop that right now, he said. You know you've been warned before. None of that comic gravedigger stuff. It's not funny and it's not clever. Just say what you've got to say, no silly bits. Ledgy looked crestfallen. Well, good sirs. Ledgy, I've known you for years, said Colon wearily. Just try, will you? The deacon wants them graves dug up, Fred, said Ledgy in a sulky voice. It's more'n been 30 years. Long past time they was in the crypts. No, said Fred Colon. But I've got a nice shelf for 'em down there, Fred, Ledgy pleaded. Right up near the front. We need the space, Fred. It's standing room only in here, and that's the truth. Even the worms have to go in single file. Right up near the front, Fred, where I can chat to 'em when I'm having me tea. How about that? The watchman and Dibbler shared a glance. Most people in the city had been into Ledgy's crypts, if only for a dare, and it had come as a shock to most of them to realise that solemn burial was not for eternity, but only for a handful of years, so that, in Ledgy's words, my little wriggly helpers could do their work. After that, the last resting place was the crypts, and an entry in the huge ledgers. Ledgy lived down there in the crypts. As he said, he was the only one who did, and he liked the company. Ledgy was generally considered weird, but conscientiously so. This isn't your idea, right? Said Fred Colon. Ledgy looked down at his feet. The new deacon's a bit, well, new, he said. You know, keen, making changes. You told him why they're not being dug up, said Nobby. He said that's just ancient history, said Ledgy. He says we all have to put the past behind us. And did you tell him that he should take it up with veterinary? Said Nobby. Yes, and he said he was sure his lordship was a forward-thinking man who wouldn't cling to relics of the past, said Ledgy. Sounds like he is new, said Dibbler. Yeah, said Nobby, and not likely to get old. It's okay, Ledgy, you can say you've asked us. The gravedigger looked relieved. Thanks, Nobby, he said. And I'd just like to say that when your time comes, gents, you'll be on a good shelf with a view. I've put your names down in my ledger for them as comes after me. Well, that's very kind of you, Ledgy, said Colon, wondering if it was. Because of pressures of space, bones in the crypt were stored by size, not by owner. There were rooms of ribs. There were avenues of femurs, and shelf after shelf of skulls up near the entrance, of course, because a crypt without a lot of skulls wasn't a proper crypt at all. If some of the religions were right and there really was a bodily resurrection one day, Fred mused, there was going to be an awful lot of confusion and general milling about. I've got just a spot, Ledgy began and then stopped. He pointed angrily towards the entrance. You know what I said about him coming up here? They turned. Corporal Reg Shoe, a whole bouquet of lilac tied to his helmet, was walking solemnly up the gravel path. He had a long-handled shovel over his shoulder. It's only Reg, said Fred. He's got a right to be here, Ledgy, you know that. He's a dead man. I'm not having a dead man in my cemetery. It's full of them, Ledgy, said Dibbler, trying to calm the man down. Yeah, but the rest of them don't walk in and out. Come on, Ledgy, you act like this every year, said Fred Colon. He can't help the way he was killed. Just because you're a zombie doesn't mean you're a bad person. He's a useful lad, Reg. Plus, it'd be a lot neater up here if everyone looked after their plots like he does. Morning, Reg. Reg Shue, grey-faced but smiling, nodded at the four of them and strolled on. And bringing his own shovel, too, muttered Ledgy. It's disgusting. I've always thought it was rather, nice of him to do what he does, said Fred. You let him alone, Ledgy. If you start throwing stones at him like you did the year before last, Commander Vimes will get to hear about it, and there'll be trouble. Be told. You're a good man with a cadaver, said Nobby. But, well, Ledgy, you weren't there, said Colon. That's the start and finish of it. Reg was. That's all there is to it, Ledgy. If you weren't there, you don't understand. Now, you just run along and count the skulls again. I know you like that. Cheerio, Ledgy. Legitimate first watched them go as they walked away. Sergeant Colon felt he was being measured up. I've always wondered about his name, said Nobby, turning and waving. I mean, legitimate? Can't blame a mother for being proud, Nobby, said Colon. What else should I know today? Said Vimes, as he and Carrot shouldered their way through the streets. We've had a letter from the Black Ribboners, sir. The Uberwald League of Temperance, made up of former vampires who now wore black ribbons to show that they had completely sworn off the sticky stuff. My word, yes, and much preferred a good sing-song and a healthy game of table tennis. A letter from the Black Ribboners, sir, suggesting it would be a great step forward for the species harmony in the city if you'd see a way clear to... They want a vampire in the Watch. Yes, sir. I believe many members of the Watch Committee think that despite your stated reservations, it would be a good... Does it look to you as if my body is dead? No, sir. Then the answer's no. What else? Carrot riffled through a stuffed clipboard as he half ran to keep up. The Times says Borogravia has invaded Moldavia, he announced. Is that good? I can't remember where it is. Both formerly part of the Dark Empire, sir, right next door to Uberwald. Whose side are we on? The Times said we should be supporting little Moldavia against the aggressor, sir. I like Borogravia already, snapped Vimes. The Times had printed, in his opinion, a particularly unflattering cartoon of him the previous week, and to make matters worse, Sybil had requested the original and had it framed. And what does all this mean to us? Probably more refugees, sir. Ye gods, we've got no more room. Why do they keep coming here? In search of a better life, sir, I think. But it's standing room only in some parts of town. I think things are worse where they come from, sir, said Carrot. What kind of refugees are we talking about here? Mostly human, sir. Do you mean that most of them will be human, or that each individual will be mostly human? Said Vimes. After a while in Ankh-Morpork, you learned to phrase that kind of question. Apart from humans, the only species I'd heard of here in any numbers are the kvetch, sir. They live in deep woods and are covered in hair. Really? Well, we'll probably find out more about them when we're asked to employ one of them in the Watch, said Vimes sourly. What else? Rather hopeful news, sir, said Carrot, smiling. You know the Whom's, the street gang? What about them? They initiated their first troll member. What? I thought they went about beating up trolls. I thought that was the whole point. Well, apparently young Calcite likes beating up trolls too. And that's good. In a way, sir. I suppose it's a step forward. United in hatred, you mean? I suppose so, sir, said Carrot. He flicked papers back and forth on his clipboard. Now, what else have I got? Oh, yes, the river patrol boat has sunk again. Where did I go wrong? Thought Vimes as the litany went on. I was a copper once. A real copper. I chased people. I was a hunter. It was what I did best. I knew where I was anywhere in the city by the feel of the street under my boots. And now look at me. A duke. Commander of the watch. A political animal. I have to know about who's fighting who 1,000 miles away, just in case that's going to mean riots here. When did I last go on patrol? Last week? Last month? And it's never a proper point patrol, because the sergeants make damn sure everyone knows I've left the building, and every damn constable reeks of armour polish and has had a shave by the time I get there, even if I nip down the back streets. And that thought, at least, was freighted with a little pride, because it showed he didn't employ stupid sergeants. I never stand all night in the rain or fight for my life rolling in the gutter with some thug, and I never move above a walk. That's all been taken away. And for what? Comfort, power, money, and a wonderful wife. Which was a good thing, of course, but even so. Damn. But I'm not a copper anymore. I'm a manager. I have to talk to the damn committee as if they're children. I go to receptions and wear damn stupid toy armour. It's all politics and paperwork. It's all got too big. What had happened to the days when it was all so simple? Faded like the lilac, he thought. They entered the palace and went up the main stairs to the oblong office. The patrician of Ankh-Morpork was standing looking out of the window when they entered. The room was otherwise deserted. "Ah, Vimes," he said, without turning round. "I thought you might be late. In the circumstances, I dismissed the committee. They were sorry, as indeed I was, to hear about Strong in the Arm. No doubt you have been writing the official letter?" Vimes flashed a questioning expression at Carrot, who rolled his eyes and shrugged. Veterinary found out things very quickly. "Yeah, that's right," said Vimes. "And on such a beautiful day as this, too," said Veterinary. "Although there's a storm heading our way, I see." He turned. He had a sprig of lilac pinned to his robe. "Lady Sybil is doing well?" he said, sitting down. "You tell me," said Vimes. "Some things can't be hurried, no doubt," said Veterinary smoothly, shuffling the papers. Let me see. There were just a few points that I should deal with. The regular letter from our religious friends at the Temple of Small Gods." He carefully removed it from the pile and set it to one side. "I think I shall invite the new deacon to tea and explain matters to him. Now, where was I? The political situation in... Yes?" The door opened. Drumknot, the chief clerk, came in. "A message for His Grace," he said, although he handed it to Lord Veterinary. The patrician passed it very politely across the desk. Vimes unfolded it. "It's off the clacks," he yelled. "We've got Carcer cornered in New Hall. I've got to get down there now." "How exciting," said Lord Veterinary, standing up suddenly. "The call to the chase. But is it necessary for you to attend personally, Your Grace?" Vimes gave him a grey look. "Yes," he said, "because if I don't, you see, some poor sod who's been trained by me to do the right thing is going to try to arrest the bugger." He turned to Carrot. "Captain, get on it right now. Clacks, pigeons, runners, whatever. I want everyone answering this shout, OK? But no one, I repeat, no one, is to try to tackle him without a lot of backup. Understood? And get Swires airborne." "Oh, damn." "What's wrong, sir?" "This message is from Littlebottom. She sent it straight here. What's she doing there? She's forensic, she's not street. She'll do it by the book." "Shouldn't she?" said Veterinary. "No. Carcer needs an arrow in his leg just to get his attention. You shoot first and ask questions later," said Veterinary. Vimes paused at the door and said, "There's nothing I want to ask him." Vimes had to slow down for breath in Sator Square, and that was disgusting. A few years ago, he'd only really be getting into his stride by now. But the storm rolling over the plains was driving the heat before it, and it wouldn't do for the commander to turn up wheezing. As it was, even after pausing behind a street market stall for a few gulps of air, he doubted if he had enough wind left for a lengthy sentence. To his tremendous relief, an entirely unwounded Corporal Cheery Littlebottom was waiting by the university walls. She saluted. "Reporting, sir," she said. Murmured Vimes. "I spotted a couple of trolls on traffic duty, sir," said Cheery, "so I've sent them around to Water Bridge. Then Sergeant Detritus turned up and I advised him to go into the university by the main gate and get up high. Sergeant Colon and Nobby arrived and I sent them along to the Bridge of Sighs." "Why?" said Vimes. "Because I doubt if he's really going to try going that way," said Cheery, her face a very careful picture. Vimes had to stop himself from nodding. "And then, as more people came along, I'm putting them around the perimeter, but I think he's gone up and he's staying high." "Why?" "Because how's he going to fight his way out through a lot of wizards, sir? His best chance is to sneak around the roofs and drop down somewhere quiet. There's lots of hiding places, and he can get all the way to Peach Pie Street without coming down." Forensic, thought Vimes. And with any luck, he doesn't know about Buggy. "Well thought out," he said. "Thank you, sir. Would you mind standing a bit closer to this wall, sir?" "What for?" Something shattered on the cobbles. Vimes was suddenly flat against the wall. "He's got a crossbow, sir," said Cheery. "We think he stole it from Strong in the Arm, but he's not very good with it." "Well done, Corporal," said Vimes weakly. "Good job." He glanced around the square behind him. The wind was whipping at the awnings of the market stalls, and the traders, with occasional looks at the sky, were covering their wares. "But we can't just let him hang around up there," he went on. "He'll start taking pot shots, and he's bound to hit someone." "Why would he do that, sir?" "Carcer doesn't need a reason," said Vimes. "He just needs an excuse." A movement far above caught his eye, and he grinned. A large bird was gaining height over the city. The heron, mumbling complaints, fought for altitude in big, sweeping circles. The city whirled around Corporal Buggy Swires as he gripped even harder with his knees, and he swung the bird downwind, and it landed with a staggering run on top of the Tower of Art, the highest building in the city. With a practised movement, the gnome sliced through the string holding the portable semaphore in place, and leapt down after it onto the compost of ivy leaves and old ravens' nests that carpeted the top of the tower. The heron watched him with round-eyed stupidity. Buggy had tamed it in the usual gnome way. You painted yourself green like a frog and hung out in the marshes, croaking, and then when a heron tried to eat you, you ran up the beak and nutted it. By the time it came around, you'd blown the special oil up its nostrils. That had taken all day to make, and the stink of it had emptied the watch-house, and it took one look at you and thought you were its mum. A heron was useful. It could carry equipment. But Buggy preferred a sparrowhawk for traffic patrol. It was better for hovering. He slotted the portable semaphore arms onto the post he'd secretly installed weeks ago. Then he unshipped a tiny telescope from the heron's saddlebags and strapped it onto the edge of the stone, looking almost straight down. Buggy liked moments like this. It was the only time that everyone else was smaller than him. "Now let's see what we can see," he muttered. There were the university buildings, there was the clock tower of old Tom, and the unmistakable bulk of Sergeant Detritus climbing amongst the nearby chimneys. The yellow light of the gathering storm glinted off the helmets of watchmen who were hurrying through the streets, and there, creeping along behind the parapet, "Gotcha," he said quietly, and reached for the handles of the semaphore. "DTRTS space HDNG space OL space TM," said Cheery. Vimes nodded. Detritus was on the roof near the tower of old Tom, and Detritus carried a siege crossbow that 3 men couldn't lift, and had converted it to fire a thick sheaf of arrows all at once. Mostly they shattered in the air because of the forces involved, and the target was hit by an expanding cloud of burning splinters. Vimes had banned him from using it on people. But it was a darn good way of getting into buildings. It could open the front door and the back door at the same time. "Tell him to fire a warning shot," he said. "If he hits Carcer with that thing, we won't even find a corpse." "Though I'd quite like to find a corpse," he added to himself. "Yes, sir." Cheery pulled a couple of white-painted paddles out of her belt, sighted on the top of the tower, and sent a brief signal. There was an answering signal from the distant Buggy. "DTRTS space WRNG space SHD," Cheery muttered to herself as she waved the rest of the message. There was another answering dip from above. A moment later, a red flare shot up from the top of the tower and exploded. It was an efficient way of getting everyone to pay attention. Then Vimes saw the message relayed. Around the university buildings, watchmen who'd also seen the order ducked into doorways. They knew about the bow. There were a few seconds for the troll to work out the spelling, a distant heavy thud, a sound like a swarm of hellish bees, and then a crash of tiles and masonry. Pieces of tile rained down into the square. An entire chimney, still with a wisp of smoke coming from it, smashed down a few yards from where Vimes was standing. Then there was the patter of dust and small bits of wood, and a gentle shower of pigeon feathers. Vimes shook some flakes of mortar off his helmet. "Yes, well, I think he's been warned," he said. Half a weathercock landed next to the chimney. Cheery blew some feathers off a telescope and sighted on the top of the tower again. "Boogie says he's stopped moving, sir," she reported. "Really, you surprise me." Vimes adjusted his belt. "And now you can give me a crossbow. I'm going up." "Sir, you said no one was to try to arrest him. That's why I sent the signal to you." "That's right. I'm going to arrest him. Right now. While he's counting all his bits to check he's still got them. Tell detritus what I'm doing, because I don't want to end up as £160 of cocktail delicacies." "No, don't keep opening your mouth like that. By the time we've sorted out backup and armour and got everyone lined up, he'll have dug in somewhere else." The last words were delivered at a run. Vimes reached a door and darted inside. New Hall was student accommodation, but it was still only 10:30, so most of them would be in bed. A few faces looked around doors, and Vimes trotted along the corridor and reached the stairwell at the far end. That took him, walking now and rather less sure of his future, to the top floor. Let's see, he'd been here before. Yes, there was a door ajar, and a glimpse of mops and buckets suggested that this was a janitor's cupboard, with, at the far end, a ladder leading up to the roof. Vimes carefully cocked the crossbow. So, Carcer had a watch crossbow too. They were good classic single-shot models, but they took a while to reload. If he fired at Vimes and missed, then that was the only shot he'd get. After that, you couldn't plan. Vimes climbed the ladder and the song came back. "They rise, feet up, feet up, feet up," he hissed under his breath. He stopped just below the edge of the open trapdoor onto the leads. Carcer wouldn't fall for the old helmet-on-stick trick. Not with just one shot available. He'd just have to risk it. Vimes thrust his head up, turned it quickly, ducked out of sight for a moment, and then came through the opening in a rush. He rolled clumsily when he hit the leads and rose into a crouch. There was no one else there. He was still alive. He breathed out. A sloping, gabled roof rose up beside him. Vimes crept along, wedged himself against a chimney stack peppered with splinters of wood, and glanced up at the tower. The sky above it was livid blue-black. Storms picked up a lot of personality as they rolled across the plains, and this one looked like a record-breaker. But brilliant sunlight picked out the Tower of Art, and at the top, the tiny dots of Buggy's frantic signal. Oh, oh, oh. Officer in trouble. A brother is hurting. Vimes spun round. There was no one creeping up on him. He eased himself around the chimneys, and there, tucked between another couple of stacks and out of sight of everyone except Vimes and the celestial Buggy, was Carcer. He was taking aim. Vimes turned his head to spot the target. 50 yards away, Carrot was picking his way across the top of the university's high-energy magic building. The bloody fool was never any good at concealment. Oh, he ducked and crept, and against all logic that made him look more noticeable. He didn't understand the art of thinking himself invisible. And there he was, furtively schlepping through the debris on the roof and looking as visible as a big duck in a small bathtub. And he'd come up without backup. The fool. Carcer was aiming carefully. The roof of the HEM was a maze of abandoned equipment, and Carrot was moving along behind the raised platform that held the huge bronze spheres known throughout the city as the Wizard's Balls, which discharged surplus magic if, or more usually when, experiments in the hall below fouled up. Carrot, screened by all that, was not making a good target. Vimes raised his crossbow. Thunder rolled. It was the roll of a giant iron cube down the stairways of the gods, a crackling, thudding crash that tore the sky in half and shook the building. Carcer glanced up and saw Vimes.
"What you doing, mister?"
Buggy didn't budge from the telescope. A crowbar wouldn't have separated them at this point.
"Shut up, you daft cobbies,"
he muttered. Both men below had fired, and both men had missed because they were trying to fire and dodge at the same time. Something hard prodded Buggy's shoulder.
"What's happening, mister?"
said the insistent voice. He turned. There were a dozen bedraggled ravens behind him, looking like old men in ill-fitting black cloaks. They were the Tower of Art birds. Hundreds of generations of living in a highly charged magical environment had raised the intelligence level of what had been bright creatures to begin with. But although the ravens were intelligent, these weren't hugely clever. They just had a more persistent kind of stupidity, as befitted birds for whom the exciting panorama of the city below was a kind of daytime TV.
"Push off!"
shouted Buggy, and turned back to the telescope. There was Carcer running, and Vimes running after him, and here came the hail. It turned the world white. It thudded around him and made his helmet ring. Hailstones as big as his head bounced on the stone and hit Buggy from underneath. Cursing and shielding his face with his arms, and hammered all the time by shattering crystal balls, each one predicting a future of pain, he skidded and slid across the rolling ice. He reached an ivy-hung arch between two lesser turrets, where the heron had already taken refuge, and fell inside. Frozen shrapnel still ricocheted in and stung him, but at least he could see and breathe. A beak prodded him sharply in the back.
"What's happening now, mister?"
Carcer landed heavily on the arch between the student hall and the main buildings, almost lost his footing on the tiles and hesitated. An arrow from a watchman below grazed his leg. Vimes dropped down behind him just as the hail hit. Cursing and slipping, one man followed the other across the arch. Carcer reached a mass of ivy that led up onto the roof of the library and scrambled up it, scattering ice below. Vimes grabbed the ivy just as Carcer disappeared onto the flat roof. He looked around at a crash behind him and saw Carrot try to make his way along the wall from the high-energy magic building. The hail was forming a halo of ice fragments around him. "Stay there!" Vimes bellowed. Carrot's reply was lost in the noise. Vimes waved his arms and then grabbed at the ivy as a foot slipped. "Bloody stay there!" he yelled. "That is an order! You'll go over!" He turned and started up the wet, cold vines. The wind dropped, and the last few hailstones bounced off the roof. Vimes stopped a few feet from the top of the ivy, worked his feet into firm footholds in the ancient knotted stems, and reached up for a decent hold. Then he thrust himself up, left hand ready, caught the boot that swung towards him, and carried on rising, pushing Carcer off balance. The man sprawled backwards on the slippery hail, tried to get onto his feet, and slipped again. Vimes tugged himself onto the roof, stepped forward, and found his legs skidding away beneath him. Both he and Carcer got up, tried to move, and fell over again. From a prone position, the man landed a kick on Vimes's shoulder, sending both of them sliding away in opposite directions, and then turned over and scuttled on all fours around the library's big glass and metal dome. He grabbed the rusty frame, hauled himself upright, and pulled out a knife.
"Come and get me then,"
he said. There was another roll of thunder.
"I don't have to," said Vimes. "I just have to wait."
At least until I get my breath back, he thought.
"Why are you picking on me? What am I supposed to have done?"
"Couple of murders ring a bell," said Vimes. If injured innocence was money, Carcer's face was his fortune.
"I don't know anything about—" "I'm not up here to play games, Carcer. Knock it off."
"You going to take me alive, Your Grace?"
"You know, I don't want to, but people think it's neater all round if I do."
There was a clattering of tiles away on the left, and a thud as a huge siege bow was rested on the ridge of a nearby roof. The head of detritus arose behind it.
"Sorry about that, Mr. Vimes. Hard to climb up in that hail. Just stand back."
"You're going to let it shoot me?" said Carcer. He tossed the knife away. "An unarmed man?" "Trying to escape," said Vimes. But this was starting to go bad. He could feel it. "Me? I'm just standing here. Ha, ha." And there it was, that bloody laugh on top of that damned grin. It was never far away. Ha-ha didn't come close to doing it the injustice it deserved. It was more a sort of a modulation to the voice, an irritatingly patronising chortle that suggested that all this was somehow funny and you hadn't got the joke. Trouble was, you couldn't shoot someone for having an annoying laugh, and he was just standing there. If he ran, you could shoot him. Admittedly, it would be detritus doing the shooting, and while with that bow it was technically possible to shoot to wound, the people you were wounding would probably be in the building next door. But Carcer was just waiting there, insulting the world by his existence. In fact, he wasn't merely standing there now. In one movement he'd swung himself onto the lower slopes of the library's dome. The glass panes, at least the glass panes that had survived the freak hail, creaked in the iron framework. "Stop right there," Vimes bellowed, "and come down." "Now, where could I go?" said Carcer, grinning at him. "I'm just waiting for you to arrest me, right? Hey, I can see your house from up here." What's under the dome, thought Vimes. How high are the bookcases? There's other floors in the library, aren't there? Like galleries. But you can definitely look up at the dome from the ground floor, right? If you were careful, could you swing onto a gallery from the edge of the dome? It'd be risky, but if a man knew he was going to swing anyway... Picking his way with care, he reached the edge of the dome. Carcer climbed up a little further. "I warn you, Carcer." "Only high spirits, Mr. Grace." "Can't blame a man for trying to enjoy his last few minutes of freedom, can you?" "I can see your house from up here." Vimes hauled himself onto the dome. Carcer cheered. "Well done, you Vimes," he said, easing himself towards the top. "Don't mess me about, Carcer. It'll go badly for you." "Badder than it's going to go anyway?" Carcer glanced down through a smashed pane. "Long way down, Mr. Vimes. I reckon a man would die instantly falling all that way, wouldn't he?" Vimes glanced down, and Carcer leapt. It didn't go the way he'd planned. Vimes had been tensed for something like this. After a complicated moment, Carcer was lying on the iron latticework, one arm under him, the other outflung and being banged heavily on the metal by Vimes. The knife it had held skidded away down the dome. "God, you must think I'm stupid," Vimes growled. "You wouldn't throw away a knife, Carcer, if you didn't have another one." Vimes's face was close to the man's now, close enough to look into the eyes above that chirpy grin and watch the demons waving. "You're hurting me, and that's not allowed." "Oh, I wouldn't want anything to happen to you, Carcer," said Vimes. "I want to see you in front of his lordship. I just want to hear you admit something for once. I just want to see that bloody cheeky grin wiped off your face. Sergeant Detritus."
"Sir?"
shouted the troll from his distant ridge. "Make a signal. I want people up here now. Me and Carcer are just going to stay nice and quiet here so he doesn't try any tricks."
"Right, sir."
With another distant clatter of doomed tiles, the troll disappeared from view. "You shouldn't have sent Captain Carrot away," muttered Carcer. "He doesn't like watchmen bullying innocent civilians." "It is true that he has yet to master some of the finer details of de facto street policing," said Vimes, maintaining his grip. "Anyway, I'm not hurting you, I'm protecting you. Wouldn't like you to fall all that way." Thunder rumbled again. The sky wasn't just storm black now. There were pinks and purples in the clouds, as though the sky was bruised. Vimes could see the clouds moving like snakes in a sack, to an endless sullen rumbling. He wondered if the wizards had been messing about with the weather. Something was happening to the air. It tasted of burned metal and flints. A weathercock on top of the dome began to spin round and round. "I didn't think you were stupid, Mr. Vimes." "What? said Vimes, looking down suddenly. Carcer was smiling cheerfully.
I said, I didn't think you were stupid, Mr. Vimes. I know a clever copper like you would think I'd got 2 knives.
Yeah, right, said Vimes. He could feel his hair trying to stand on end. Little blue caterpillars of light were crackling over the ironwork of the dome and even over his armour.
Mr. Vimes?
What? Vimes snapped. Smoke was rising from the weathercock's bearings.
I got 3 knives, Mr. Vimes,
said Carcer, bringing his arm up. The lightning struck. Windows blew out and iron gutters melted. Roofs lifted into the air and settled again. Buildings shook. But this storm had been blowing in from far across the plains, pushing the natural background magic ahead of it. It dumped it now all in one go. They said afterwards that the bolt of lightning hit a clockmaker's shop in the Street of Cunning Artificers, stopping all the clocks at that instant. But that was nothing. In Baker Street, a couple who'd never met before became electrically attracted to one another and were forced to get married after 2 days for the sake of public decency. In the Assassin's Guild, the chief armourer became hugely, and since he was in the armoury at the time, tragically attractive to metal. Eggs fried in their baskets, apples roasted on the greengrocer's shelves, candles lit themselves, cartwheels exploded. And the ornate tin bath of the Arch-Chancellor of Unseen University was lifted neatly off the floor, sizzled across his study, and then flew off the balcony and onto the lawn in the octangle several stories below, without spilling more than a cupful of suds. Arch-Chancellor Mustrum Ridcully paused with his long-handled scrubbing brush, hovering halfway down his back, and stared around. Tiles smashed to the ground around him. Water boiled in the ornamental fountain nearby. Ridcully ducked as a stuffed badger, the origin of which was never ascertained, flew across the lawn and smashed through a window. He winced as he was hit by a brief and inexplicable shower of small cogwheels, which pattered down all around him. He stared as 6 watchmen dashed into the octangle and headed up the steps to the library. Then, gripping the sides of the bath, the Arch-Chancellor stood up. Foaming water cascaded off him, as it would off some ancient leviathan erupting from the abyssal sea.
"Mr. Stevens," he bellowed, his voice bouncing off the imposing walls, "where the is my hat?"
He sat down again and waited. There was a few minutes of silence, and then Ponder Stibbons, head of inadvisably applied magic and Praelector of Unseen University, came running out of the main door carrying Ridcully's pointy hat. The Arch-Chancellor snatched at it and rammed it on his head.
"Very well," he said, standing up again. "Now, will care to tell at the is going on, and why old Tom ing repeatedly?"
Magic, sir. I went up the mechanism," Ponder shouted above the sound-destroying silences. Old Tom, the university's venerable clock, told not sounds but silences. Not simple, ordinary silences, but intervals of noise-absorbing non-sound that filled the world with loud soundlessness. There was the dying metallic noise from the big clock tower. Ponder and Ridcully waited a few moments, but the city stayed full of normal noise like the collapse of masonry and distant screams.
"Right,"
said Ridcully, as if grudgingly awarding the world a mark for trying.
"What was all that about, Stibbons? Why are there policemen in the library?"
The big magical storm, sir, in several thousand gigathorms. I believe that the watch is chasing a criminal."
"Well, they can't just run in here without asking," said Ridcully, stepping out of the bath and striding forward. "What do we pay our taxes for, after all?"
We don't actually pay taxes, sir," said Ponder, running after him. The system is that we promise to pay taxes if the city ever asks us to, but provided the city promises never to ask us, sir. We make a voluntary—"
"Well, at least we have an arrangement, Stibbons."
Yes, sir. May I point out to you that you—"
"And that means they have to ask permission. The essential decencies must be maintained," said Ridcully firmly. "And I am the master of this college."
On the subject of decencies, sir, you are not, in fact, wearing— Ridcully strode through the open doors of the library.
"What's going on here?" he demanded.
The watchman turned and stared. A large blob of foam, which up until that point had been performing sterling service in the cause of the essential decencies, slipped slowly to the floor.
"Well," he snapped, "haven't you lot seen a wizard before?"
A watchman snapped to attention and saluted.
"Captain Carrot, sir. We've, never seen so much of a wizard, sir."
Ridcully gave him the slow, blank stare used by those with acute uptake-grasping deficiency.
"What's he talking about, Stibbons?"
he said out of the corner of his mouth.
You're, insufficiently dressed, sir." "What? I've got my hat on, haven't I?"
"Yes, sir."
"Hat equals wizard. Wizard equals hat. Everything else is frippery. Anyway, I'm sure we're all men of the world," Ridcully added, looking around.
For the first time he took in the other details about the watchman.
"And dwarves of the world. Trolls of the world too, I see. And, women of the world too, I note.
The Arch-Chancellor lapsed into a moment's silence and then said,
"Mr. Stibbons?"
"Yes, sir."
"Would you be so kind as to run up to my rooms and fetch my robe?"
"Of course, sir."
"And in the meantime, please be so good as to lend me your hat."
"But, you do actually have your hat on, sir?" said Ponder.
"Quite so,
said Ridcully, slowly and carefully through his fixed grin.
"And now, Mr. Stibbons, in addition, right now, I wish you, in fact, to lend to me your hat, please."
"Oh," said Ponder. Yes." A few minutes later, a thoroughly clean and decent and clothed Arch-Chancellor was standing in the very centre of the library, staring up at the damaged dome, while beside him Ponder Stibbons, who for some reason had elected to continue to remain hatless, even though his hat had been handed back to him, stared glumly at some magical instruments.
"Nothing at all,"
said Ridcully. "Ook," said the librarian, who was an orangutan, changed from his former human shape as a result of a long-forgotten magical accident. It was so forgotten, in fact, that now people were forgetting he was an orangutan. This might seem quite hard to do, given that even a small orangutan is quite capable of filling all immediately available space, but to the wizards and most of the citizens, he was now just the librarian. And that was that. In fact, if some ever reported that there was an orangutan in the library, the wizards would probably go and ask the librarian if he'd seen it.
"You've searched everywhere?"
"And he can't search everywhere in this library, sir," said Ponder. "That would take more time than actually could possibly exist. But all the mundane shelves, certainly." Carrot turned to Ponder.
"What was the for, please, sir?"
You understand that this is a magical library, and that means that even in normal circumstances there is an area of high magical potential above the bookshelves."
"I have been here before," said Carrot.
"Then you know that time with libraries is somewhat more flexible," said Ponder. "Given the additional power of the storm, it might just be possible that...
"Are you going to tell me he's been moved in time?" said the watchman.
Ponder was impressed. He hadn't been brought up to believe that watchmen were clever. However, he took care not to show it. "Would that it were that simple," he said. "However, the lightning appears to have added a random lateral component."
"A what?"
said Ridcully.
"You mean in time and space," said Carrot.
Ponder felt himself getting rattled. Non-wizards shouldn't be that quick.
"Not exactly," he said, and gave up.
"I'm really going to have to work on this, Arch-Chancellor. Some of the readings I'm getting can't possibly be real." Vimes knew that he had woken up. There had been darkness and rain and a terrible pain in his face. Then there had been another flowering of pain on the back of his neck, and a feeling of being pulled this way and that. And now there was light. He could see it through his eyelids. His left eyelid, anyway. Nothing but pain was happening on the other side of his face. He kept the eyes shut and strained his hearing instead. Someone was moving about. There was a chink of metal. A woman's voice said, "He's awake."
"Are you sure?" said the man's voice. "How can you tell?"
"Because I'm good at telling if a man's asleep," said the woman. Vimes opened his eye. He was lying on a bench or table of some sort. A young woman was leaning against the wall next to him, and her dress and bearing and the way she leaned filed immediately in Vimes's policeman brain as seamstress, but one of the bright ones. The man had a long black robe and a silly floppy hat that got filed under "Help, I'm in the hands of a doctor." He sat bolt upright. "You lay one hand on me and I'll thump you," he yelled, trying to swing his legs off the table. Half his head burst into flame. "I should take it easy if I were you," said the doctor, gently pushing him back. "That was a very nasty cut. And don't touch the eye patch." "Cut!" said Vimes, his hand brushing the stiff cloth of an eye patch. Memories interlocked. "Carcer, did anyone get him?" "Whoever attacked you got away," said the doctor. "After that fall?" said Vimes. "He must have been limping at least. Look, I've got to get—" Then he noticed all the other things. He'd been picking them up all the time, but only now did the subconscious present the list. He wasn't wearing his own clothes. "What's happened to my uniform?" he said. And he noticed the "I told you so" expression the woman gave the doctor. "Whoever attacked you stripped you down to your drawers and left you lying in the street," she said. "I found you some spare clothes at my place. It's amazing what people leave behind." "Who took my armour?" "I never know names," said the woman. "I saw a bunch of men running off carrying stuff, though." "Ordinary thieves? Didn't they leave a receipt?" "No," she said, laughing. "Why should they?" "And are we allowed to ask questions?" said the doctor, tidying his tools. None of this was right. "Well, thank you, yes," said Vimes. "What's your name?" Vimes's hand stopped halfway to his face again. "You mean you don't know me?" he said. "Should we?" said the doctor. None of this was right. "This is Ankh-Morpork, isn't it?" said Vimes. Yes," said the doctor, and turned to the woman. "There was a blow to the head," he said, "but I wouldn't have thought it was that bad." "Look, I'm wasting time," said the woman. "Who are you, mister?" Everyone in the city knew Vimes, surely. The Guild of Seamstresses certainly did, and the doctor didn't look stupid. Perhaps this was not the right time to be totally truthful. He might just be somewhere where being a copper wasn't a good thing to be. It might be dangerous to be Vimes, and right now he wasn't well enough to deal with it. "Keel," he said. The name just dropped into his mind. It had been bubbling just under the surface of his thoughts all day, ever since the lilac. "Yeah, right," said the woman, smiling. "Want to make my first name?" "John," said Vimes. "Appropriate. Well, John, it's like this. Men lying flat out and naked round here aren't all that uncommon. And it's a funny thing, but they don't usually want anyone to know their real name or where they live. You won't be the first one Dr. Lorne here has patched up. My name's Rosie. And now there's a little fee, you understand, for both of us?" All right, I know how this goes," said Vimes, holding up his hands. "This is the Shades, right?" They both nodded. "OK then, thank you. I haven't got any money, obviously, but once I've got home—" "I'll escort you, shall I?" said the woman, handing him a badly styled coat and a pair of antique boots. "I wouldn't like you to be attacked by anything. A sudden loss of memory, for example." Vimes snapped, but very gently. His face hurt, and there were plenty of other bruises everywhere, and he was dressed in a suit that smelled like a privy. He'd go up the watch house, get cleaned and changed, and make a quick report and head on home. And this young lady could spend a night in the cells and then be handed over to the Seamstresses Guild. They came down heavily on extortion like this. It was bad for trade. "All right," he said, and he pulled the boots on. The soles were made of cardboard, and they were too tight. Dr. Lorne waved his hands in a general gesture of dismissal. "He's all yours, Rosie. You leave that patch on for a few days, Mr. Keel, and with any luck you'll have a working eye. Someone took a slash at you with a sharp knife. I've done the best I can, and the stitching is good, but you're going to have a nasty scar." Vimes raised his hand to his cheek yet again. "And don't pick at it," Lorne snapped. "Come on, John," said Rosie. "Let's get you home where you belong." They stepped out. Water was dripping from the eaves, but the rain had eased. "I live up past Pseudopolis Yard," said Vimes. "Lead on," said Rosie. They hadn't reached the end of the street before Vimes was aware that a couple of dark figures had fallen in behind them. He was about to turn, but Rosie clamped a hand on his arm. "Don't bother them, and they won't bother you." she said. "They're just coming with us for safety." "Whose, yours or mine?" Rosie laughed. "Both," she said. "Yes, you just keep on walking, kind sir, and we'll be as quiet as little mice," said a shrill voice behind him. A slightly deeper one said, "That's right, dearie. Just be a good boy and Auntie Dotsy won't have to open her handbag." "That's Dotsy and Sadie," said Vimes. "The agony aunts. Well, they bloody well know who I am." He turned. The dark figures, both wearing old-fashioned black straw hoods, stepped back. In the gloom there were a number of metallic noises, and Vimes forced himself to relax a little. Even though they were, more or less, on the same side as the watch, you never quite knew where you were with the agony aunts. Of course, that's what made them so useful. Any customer disturbing the peace in one of the local houses of good repute feared the threat of the aunts far more than he did the watch. The watch had rules, and the watch didn't have Dotsy's handbag, and Sadie could do terrible things with a parrot-headed umbrella. "Come on," he said. "Dotsy, Sadie, let's not mess about, eh?" Something prodded him in the chest. He looked down. The thing had a carved parrot head on it. "You must keep walking, kind sir," said a voice. "Why, you still got toes, dearie," said another voice. "Probably a good idea," said Rosie, tugging Vimes's arm. "But I can tell you've impressed them." "How?" "You're not bent double and making bubbling noises. Come along, mystery man." Vimes stared ahead, looking out for the blue light of Pseudopolis Yard. Somehow it'd all make sense there. But when he got there, there was no blue light over the archway. There were just a few lights upstairs. Vimes hammered on the door until it opened a crack. "What the hell's going on here?" he demanded, to the nose and one eye that was the visible totality of the occupant. "And get out of the way!" He pushed the door back and strode in. It wasn't the watch house, not inside. There were the familiar stairs right enough, but there was a wall right across the charge room, and carpets on the floor, and tapestries on the wall, and a housemaid holding a tray, and staring, and dropping the tray, and screaming. "Where are all my officers?" Vimes yelled. "You leave this minute, do you hear? You can't just come in like that. You get out of here." Vimes turned and confronted the old man who'd opened the door. He looked like a butler and had picked up a cudgel. Perhaps because of nerves, or maybe just because of general elderly tremors, the tip of the cudgel waved and weaved under his nose. Vimes snatched it and threw it on the floor. "What is going on?" he demanded. The old man looked as bewildered as he was. Vimes felt an odd, hollow terror welling up inside him. He darted back through the open door and into the wet night. Rosie and the aunts had melted away in the darkness, as night people do when trouble looms, but Vimes ran on and into King's Way, pushing aside other pedestrians and dodging the occasional carriage. He was getting a second wind when he reached Scoon Avenue and turned into the driveway at number 1. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but the place looked normal, and there were torches burning on either side of the door. Familiar gravel crunched under his feet. He went to hammer on the door, but steeled himself not to, and rang the bell instead. After a moment, the door was opened by a butler. "Thank goodness," said Vimes. "It's me, man. Been in a fight. Nothing to worry about. How is—" "What do you want?" said the butler coldly. He took a step back, bringing him more fully in the light of the hall lamps. Vimes had never seen him before. "What happened to Willikins?" said Vimes. "The scullery boy?" Now the butler's tone was icy. "If you are a relative, I suggest you inquire around at the tradesman's entrance. You ought to know better than to come to the front door." Vimes tried to think how to deal with this, but his fist didn't bother to wait. It laid the man out quite cleanly. "No time for this," said Vimes, stepping over him. He stood in the middle of the big hall and cupped his hands. "Mrs. Content? Sybil?" he yelled, feeling the terror twist and knot inside him. "Yes?" said a voice from what Vimes had always called the ghastly pink drawing-room, and Sybil stepped out. It was Sybil. The voice was right, and the eyes were right, and the way she stood was right. But the age wasn't right. This was a girl, far too young to be Sybil. She looked from him to the prone butler. "Did you do that to Forsyth?" she said. There's been a mistake," Vimes murmured, backing away. But Sybil was already pulling a sword off the wall. It wasn't there for show. Vimes couldn't remember if his wife had ever learned to fence, but several feet of edged weapon is quite threatening enough when wielded by an angry amateur. Amateurs sometimes get lucky. He backed away hurriedly. "It's been a mistake. Wrong house, mistaken identity." He almost tripped over the fallen butler, but managed to turn this into a staggering run through the doorway and down the steps. Wet leaves brushed against him as he blundered through the shrubbery to the gateway, where he leaned against the wall and gulped for air. That bloody library! Hadn't he heard something once about how you could walk through time or something there? All those magical books pressed together did something strange. Sybil had been so young. She looked 16. No wonder there wasn't a watch house in Pseudopolis Yard. They'd only moved in there a few years ago. The water was soaking through the cheap clothes. Back home somewhere was his huge leather greatcoat, heavy with oil, warm as toast. Think. Don't let the terror take control. Perhaps he could go and explain things to Sybil. After all, she was still Sybil, wasn't she? Kind to bedraggled creatures. But even the softest heart would be inclined to harden when a rough, desperate man with a fresh scar and bad clothes barged into the house and said he was going to be her husband. A young woman could get quite the wrong idea, and he wouldn't want that, not while she was holding a sword. Besides, Lord Ramkin was probably still alive, and he'd been a bloodthirsty old devil as far as Vimes could recall. He slumped against the wall and reached for a cigar, and the terror twisted him again. There was nothing in his pocket, nothing at all. No pantweed slim panatellas, but, more importantly, no cigar case. It had been especially made. It had a slight curve. It had always nestled in his pocket since the day Sybil had given it to him. It was as near part of him as anything could be. We are here, and this is now. Constable Visit, a strict believer in the Omnium religion, occasionally quoted that from their holy book. Vimes understood it to mean, in less exalted copper speak, that you have to do the job that is in front of you. I am here, Vimes thought, and this is then. And less conscious parts of this brain added, you have no friends here, no home here, no purpose here. You are alone here. No, not alone, said a part that was much, much deeper even than the terror, and was always on watch. Someone was watching him. A figure detached itself from the damp shadows of the street and walked towards him. Vimes couldn't make out the face, but that didn't matter. He knew it would be smiling, that special smile of the predator who knows he has the prey under his paw, and knows that the prey knows this too, and also knows that the prey is desperately going to act as if they're having a perfectly friendly conversation, because the prey wants so much for this to be the case. You don't want to die here, said the deep, dark part of Vimes's soul. Got a light, mister, said the predator. He didn't even bother to wave an unlit cigarette. Why, yes, of course, said Vimes. He went as if to pat his pocket, but swung around, arm outstretched, and caught a man creeping up behind him right across the ear. Then he leapt for the light demander in front of him and bore him to the ground with an arm across his throat. It would have worked. He knew afterwards that it really would have worked. If there hadn't been two more men in the shadows, it would have worked. As it was, he managed to kick one of them on the kneecap before he felt the garrote go round his neck. He was pulled upright, the scars screaming pain as he tried to clutch at the rope. You hold him right there, said a voice. Look what he did to Jez. Damn, I'm going to kick him in. The shadows moved. Vimes, struggling for breath, his one good eye watering, was only vaguely aware of what was happening. But there were some grunts and some soft, strange noises, and the pressure on his neck was abruptly released. He fell forward and then, reeling a little, struggled to his feet. A couple of men were lying on the ground. One was bent double, making little bubbling noises. And far off, and getting further, there were running footsteps. "Lucky we found you in time, kind sir," said a voice right behind him. "Not lucky for some, dearie," said the one right next to it. Rosie stepped forward out of the gloom. "I think you ought to come back with us," she said. "You're going to get hurt, running around like this. Come on." "Obviously I'm not taking you back to my place." "Obviously," murmured Vimes. "But Mossy'll find you somewhere to lay your head, I expect." "Mossy Lawn?" said Vimes, suddenly light-headed. "That's him, the pox doctor. I remember." He tried to focus one tired eye on the young woman. Yes, the bone structure was right. That chin, that was a no-nonsense chin. It was a chin that took people somewhere. Rosie, you're Mrs. Palm. Mrs.? She said coldly, while the agony aunts giggled their high-pitched giggle. I think not. Well, I mean, Vimes floundered. And I've never seen you before, said Rosie, and neither have Dotsy and Sadie, and they have an amazing memory for faces. But you act as if you own the place, John Keel. Do I? You do. It's the way you stand. Officers stand like that. You eat well, maybe a bit too well. You could lose a few pounds. And then there's the scars all over you. I saw them in Moss's place. Your legs are tanned from the knees down, and that says watchman to me, because they go bare-legged. But I know every watchman in the city, and you're not one of them, so maybe you're a military man. You fight by instinct, and dirty too. That means you're used to fighting for your life in a melee, and that's odd, because that says to me foot soldier, not officer. The word is that the lads took some fine armour off you. That's officer. But you don't wear rings. That's foot soldier. Rings catch in things. Can pull your finger off if you're not careful. And you're married. How can you tell that? Any woman could tell that, said Rosie Palm smoothly. Now, step sharp. We're out after curfew as it is. The watch won't bother much about us, but they will about you. Curfew, thought Vimes. That was a long time ago. Veterinari never ordered curfews. They interfered with business. I think perhaps I lost my memory when I was attacked, he said. That sounded good, he thought. What he really needed now was somewhere quiet to think. Really? I think perhaps I'm the Queen of Hersheba, said Rosie. Just remember, kind sir, I'm not doing this because I'm interested in you, although I'd admit to a macabre fascination about how long you're going to survive. If it hadn't been a cold, wet night, I'd have left you in the road. I'm a working girl, and I don't need trouble. But you look like a man who can lay his hands on a few dollars, and there will be a bill. I'll leave the money on the dressing table, said Vimes. The slap in the face knocked him against the wall. Consider that a sign of my complete lack of a sense of humour, will you? Said Rosie, shaking some life back into her hand. Sorry, said Vimes. I didn't mean to... look, thank you for everything, I mean it. But this is not being a good night. Yes, I can see that. It's worse than you think, believe me. We all have our troubles, believe me, said Rosie. Vimes was glad of the agony aunts behind them as they walked back to the Shades. This was the old Shades, and Lorne lived a street's width away from it. The watch never set foot here. In truth, the new Shades wasn't a lot better, but people had at least learned what happened if anyone attacked a watchman. The aunts were a different matter. No one attacked the aunts. A night's sleep, thought Vimes. Maybe in the morning this won't have happened. She wasn't there, was she? Said Rosie after a while. Your wife. That was Lord Ramkin's house. Are you in trouble with him? Never met the man, said Vimes absently. You were lucky someone told us where you'd gone. Those men were probably in the pay of someone up there. They're a law unto themselves over in Ankh. Some rough man walking around with no tradesman's tools, well, he's to be turned off the patch. And if they rob you blind while they're doing it, who's going to care? Yes, thought Vimes, that's the way it was. Privilege, which just means private law. Two types of people laugh at the law, those that break it and those that make it. Well, it's not like that now. But I'm not in now. Damn those wizards. The wizards, right. In the morning I'll go and explain, easy. They'll understand. I bet they can send me right back to when I left. There's a whole university full of people to deal with this. It's not my problem anymore. Relief filled his body like a warm pink mist. All he had to do was get through the night. But why wait? They were open all night, weren't they? Magic didn't shut. Vimes remembered late-night patrols when he could practically see by the glows coming from some of the windows. He could simply... Hold on. A policeman's thought had been stirring in his mind. The aunts didn't run. They famously didn't run. They caught up with you slowly. Anyone who'd been, as they called it, a very naughty boy, would sleep extremely badly knowing that the ants on his tail were slowly getting nearer, pausing only for a cream tea somewhere or to visit an interesting jumble sale. But Vimes had run all the way up to Scone Avenue, in the dark, through coach traffic and crowds of people worming home before curfew. No one had paid him any attention. Would surely not have seen his face if they did, and he certainly didn't know anyone here. He amended the thought. No one knew him. "So," he said casually, "who told you where I'd gone?" "Oh, one of those old monks," said Rosie. "Which old monks?" "Oh, knows. A little bald man with a robe and a broom. There's always monks begging and chanting somewhere. He was in Feeder Road." "And you asked him where I'd gone?" "What? No. He just looked round and said, 'Mr. Keel ran up to Scone Avenue.' Then he went on sweeping." "Sweeping?" "Oh, it's the kind of holy thing they do, so they don't tread on ants, I think. Or they sweep sins away, or maybe they just like the place clean. Who cares what monks do?" "And nothing about that struck you as odd?" "Why? I thought perhaps you were naturally kind of beggars," snapped Rosie. "Doesn't bother me. Dotsy said she put something in his begging bowl, though." "What?" "Would you ask?" The majority of Vimes thought, who does care about what monks do? They're monks. That's why they're weird. Maybe one had a moment of revelation or something. They like that kind of thing. So what? Find the wizards. Explain what's happened and leave it to them. But the policeman part thought, how do little monks know I'm called Keel? I smell a rat. The majority said, it's a 30-year-old rat then. And the policeman said, yeah, that's why it smells. "Look, I'm going to have to go and check something," he said. "I'll probably be back." "Well, I can't chain you up," said Rosie. She smiled a grim little smile and went on, "That costs extra. But if you don't come back, yet have any intention of staying in this city, then the aunts—" "I promise you, the last thing I want to do is leave Ankh-Morpork," said Vimes. "That actually sounded convincing," said Rosie. "Off you go then. We're past curfew now, but why don't I think you'll be bothered by that?" As he disappeared in the gloom, Dotsy sidled up to Rosie. "Do you want we should follow him, dearie?" "Don't bother." "You should have let Sadie give him a little prod, dear. That slows them down." "I think it takes quite a lot to slow that man down. And we don't want trouble. Not at a time like this. We're too close." "You don't want to be out at a time like this, mister." Vimes turned. He'd been hammering on the closed gates of the university. There were 3 watchmen behind him. One of them was holding a torch. Another was holding a sword. A third had clearly decided that activities for tonight would not include heavy lifting. Vimes raised his hands slowly. "I expect he wants to be in a nice cold cell for the night," said the one with the torch. Oh dear, thought Vimes. It's the Comedian of the Year contest. Coppers really oughtn't to try this, but they still did. "I was just visiting the university," he said. "Oh, yeah," said the one without either torch or sword. He was portly, and Vimes could make out the tarnished gleam of a sergeant's stripes. "Where do you live?" "Nowhere," said Vimes. "I've just arrived. And shall we move right along? I don't have a job and I don't have any money, and neither of those is a crime." "Out after curfew? No visible means of support," said the sergeant. "I got me legs," said Vimes. "At the moment," said one of the men. He stopped when Vimes looked at him. "I want to make a complaint, Sergeant." "What about?" "You," said Vimes. "And the brother's grin here. You're not doing it right. If you're going to arrest someone, you take charge right away. You've got a badge and a weapon, yes? And he's got his hands up and a guilty conscience. Everyone's got a guilty conscience. So he's wondering what you know and what you're going to do. And what you do is fire off the questions sharply. You don't make silly jokes because that makes you all too human, and you keep him off balance so he can't quite think a clear sentence. And above all, you don't let him move like this and grab your arm and pull it up so it almost breaks like this, and grab your sword and hold it to your throat like this. Tell your men to lower those swords, will you?" The way they're waving them around, they could hurt someone. The sergeant gurgled. Right, said Vimes. Oh, Sergeant, this is a sword? Ever sharpen it? What do you use it for, bludgeoning people to death? Now, what you're going to do is, you're all going to put your weapons on the ground over there, and then I'm going to let the Sarge go, and I'll leg it up that alley, okay? And by the time you've got your weapons, and believe me, I'd advise you to get all the weapons before coming after me, I'll be well away. End of problem all round. Any questions? All three watchmen were silent. Then Vimes heard a very faint, very close noise. It was the sound of the hairs in his ears rustling, as with great care the tip of a crossbow bolt gently entered his ear. Yes, sir, I have a question, said the voice behind him. Do you ever listen to your own advice? Vimes felt the pressure of the crossbow against his skull and wondered how far the arrow would go if the trigger was pulled. An inch would be too much. Sometimes you just had to take the lumps. He dropped the sword with great and exaggerated care, released his grip on the sergeant and stepped away meekly while the fourth watchman maintained his aim. I'll just stand with my legs apart, shall I? He said. Yeah, growled the sergeant, turning around. Yeah, that'll save us a bit of time. Although for you, mister, we've got all night. Well done, Lance Constable. We'll make a watchman of you yet. Yeah, well done, said Vimes, staring at the young man with the bow. But the sergeant was already taking his run-up. It was later. Pain had happened. Vimes lay on the hard cell bed and tried to make it go away. It hadn't been as bad as it might be. That mob hadn't even been able to organise a good seeing to. They didn't understand how a man could roll with the punches, and half the time they were getting in their own way. Was he enjoying this? Not the pain. He'd pass on the pain. In fact, he's passed out on the pain. But there was that small part of him he'd heard sometimes during strenuous arrests after long chases, the part that wanted to punch and punch long after punching had already achieved its effect. There was a joy to it. He called it the beast. It stayed hidden until you needed it, and then, when you needed it, out it came. Pain brought it out, and fear. He'd killed werewolves with his bare hands, mad with anger and terror and tasting deep inside the blood of the beast. And it was sniffing the air. Hello, Mr. Vimes. I was wondering when you'd wake up. He sat up sharply. The cells were barred on the corridor side, but also between cells as well, on the basis that those caged ought to know they were in a cage. And in the next cell, lying with his hands behind his head, was Carcer. Go on, said Carcer cheerfully. Make a grab for me through the bars, eh? Want to see how long it takes before the guards arrive? At least they got you too, said Vimes. Not for long, not for long. I smell of roses, me. Visit to the city. Got lost. Very helpful to the watch. So sorry to have bothered them. Here's a little something for their trouble. You shouldn't have stopped the watch taking bribes, Mr. Vimes. It means an easier life all round. Then I'll nail you some other way, Carcer. Carcer inserted a finger in his nose, wiggled it round, withdrew it, inspected its contents critically, and flicked them up towards the ceiling. Well, that's where it goes all runny, Mr. Vimes. You see, I wasn't dragged in by 4 coppers. I didn't go around assaulting watchmen or trying to break into the university. I was knocking on the door. I believe you, Mr. Vimes, but you know what coppers are like. You look at them in that funny way, and the buggers will fit you up for every crime in the book. Terrible what they can pin on an honest man. Vimes knew it. So you got some money, he said. Of course, Mr. Vimes, I'm a crook. And the best part is, it's even easier to be a crook when no one knows you're a crook. But coppering depends on people believing you're a copper. A turn up for the books, eh? You know, we're back in the good old days. It seems that way, Vimes admitted. He didn't like talking to Carcer, but right now he seemed to be the only real person around. Where did you land, if I may ask? In the shades. Me too. Couple of blokes tried to mug me where I lay. Me, I ask you, Mr. Vimes. Still, they had some money on them, so that worked out all right. Yes, I think I'm going to be very happy here. Oh, here comes one of our brave lads. A watchman walked along the passage swinging his keys. He was elderly, the kind of copper who gets given the jobs where swinging keys is more likely than swinging a truncheon, and his most distinguishing feature was a nose twice the width and half the length of the average nose. He stared at Vimes for a moment and then passed on to Carcer's cell. He unlocked the door. "You, hop it," he said. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir," said Carcer, hurrying out. He pointed to Vimes. "You want to watch that one, sir? He's an animal. Decent people shouldn't be locked up in the same cell, sir." "Hop it," I said. "Hopping it, sir, thank you, sir." And Carcer, with a leery wink at Vimes, hopped it. The jailer turned to Vimes. "And what's your name, mister?" "John Keel," said Vimes. "Yeah?" "Yeah, and I've had my kick-in. Fair's fair. I'd like to go now." "Oh, you'd like to go, would you?" "You'd like me to hand over these keys and give you 5p in the poor box for your trouble, eh?" The man was standing very close to the bars, with the grin of one who mistakenly thinks he's a wit when he's only half a one. And if Vimes's reflexes were quicker, and he'd bet they were even now, it'd be the work of a second to pull the old fool forcibly into the bars and spread his nose even further across his face. No doubt about it, the psychopaths had it the easy way. "Just freedom would do," he said, resisting temptation. "You ain't going anywhere, except to see the captain," said the jailer. "That'd be Captain Tilden," said Vimes. "Have I got that right? Smokes like a bonfire, got a brass ear and a wooden leg." "Yeah, and he can have you shot. How do you like them bananas?" The cluttered desk of Vimes's memory finally unearthed the inadvertent coffee mat of recollection from under the teacup of forgetfulness. "You're snouty," he said. "Right? Some bloke broke your nose and it never got set properly, and your eyes water all the time, which is why they gave you permanent jail duty." "Do I know you, mister?" said Snouty, peering at Vimes through suspicious running eyes. "Me? No, said Vimes hastily. "But I've heard people talk about you. Practically runs the watch house, they said. Very fair man, they said. Firm but fair. Never spits in the gruel, never whittles in the tea, and never confuses his fruit either." The visible parts of Snouty's face contorted into the resentful scowl of someone who can't quite keep up with the script. "Oh, yeah," he managed. "Well, I've always kept a clean cell, that's very true." He looked a little nonplussed at the development, but managed another scowl. "You stay here, mister, and I'll go and tell the captain you woke up." Vimes went back and lay on the bunk, staring at the badly spelled and anatomically incorrect graffiti on the ceiling. For a while there was a raised voice from upstairs with an occasional intrusive from Snouty. Then he heard the jailer's footsteps on the stairs again. Well, he said, with the tone of someone looking forward to seeing a third party get what was coming to them. "Turns out the captain wants to see you right away. Now, are you going to let me shackle you, or do I call the lads down?" Gods protect you, Vimes thought. Maybe it was true that the blow that had spread Snouty's nose across his face had scrambled his brain. You had to be a special kind of idiot to try to handcuff a dangerous prisoner all by yourself. If he'd tried it with Carcer, for example, he'd have been a dead idiot 5 minutes ago. The jailer opened the door. Vimes stood up and presented his wrists. After a second's hesitation, Snouty handcuffed him. It always paid to be nice to the jailer. You might not get handcuffed behind your back. But a man with both hands in front of him had quite a lot of freedom. "You go up the stairs first," said Snouty, and reached down and picked up a rather more efficient-looking crossbow than Vimes had seen last night. "And if you even try to walk fast, mister, I'll shoot you, where you die slow." "Very fair," said Vimes, "very fair." He walked up the stairs very carefully, hearing Snouty's heavy breathing right behind him. Like many people of limited intellectual scope, Snouty did take what he could do very seriously. He'd show a refreshing lack of compunction about pulling that trigger, for one thing. Vimes reached the top of the stairs and remembered to hesitate. "Now, turn left, you," said Snouty behind him. Vimes nodded to himself, and then first on the right it was all coming back to him in a great wave. This was Treacle Mine Road. This was his first watch house. This was where it all began. The captain's door was open. The tired-looking old man behind the desk glanced up.
"Be seated," said Tilden coldly. "Thank you, Snouty."
Vimes had mixed memories of Captain Tilden. He had been a military man before being given this job as a kind of pension, and that was a bad thing in a senior copper. It meant he looked to authority for orders and obeyed them, whereas Vimes found it better to look to authority for orders and then filter those orders through a fine mesh of common sense, adding a generous scoop of creative misunderstanding and maybe even incipient deafness if circumstances demanded, because authority rarely descended to street level. Tilden set too great a score by shiny breastplates and smartness on parade. You had to have some of that stuff. That was true enough. You couldn't let people slob around. But although he'd never voiced the view in public, Vimes liked to see a bit of battered armour around the place. It showed that someone had been battering it. Besides, when you were lurking in the shadows, you didn't want to gleam. There was an Ankh-Morpork flag pinned to one wall. The red faded to threadbare orange. Rumour had it that Tilden saluted it every day. There was also a very large silver inkstand with a gilt regimental crest on it, occupying quite a lot of the desk. Snouty polished it every morning and it shone. Tilden had never quite left the army behind. Still, Vimes retained a soft spot for the old man. He'd been a successful soldier as these things went. He'd generally been on the winning side and had killed more of the enemy by good if dull tactics than his own men by bad but exciting ones. He'd been, in his own way, kind and reasonably fair. The men of the watch had run rings around him without him even noticing. Now Tilden was giving him the long stare with associated paperwork. It was supposed to mean, "We know all about you, so why don't you tell us all about yourself?" But he really wasn't any good at it. Vimes returned it blankly.
"What is your name again?"
said Tilden, aware that Vimes was the better starer.
"Keel," said Vimes. "John Keel."
And what the hell?
"Look," he said, "you've only got one piece of paper there that means anything, and that's the report from that sergeant, assuming he can write." "As a matter of fact, I have two pieces of paper," said the captain. "The other one concerns the death of John Keel." "What?"
"What?"
"For a scrap with the watch. In the current emergency, that would be quite sufficient for the death penalty," said Tilden, leaning forward. "But, perhaps it won't be necessary in this case, because John Keel died yesterday. You beat him up and robbed him, what? You took his money, but you didn't bother with the letters because your sort can't read, what? So you wouldn't have known that John Keel was a policeman, what?" "What?"
Vimes stared at the skinny face with its triumphantly bristling moustache and the little faded blue eyes. And then there was the sound of someone industriously sweeping the floor in the corridor outside. The captain looked past him, growled, and hurled a pen.
"Get him out of here!" he barked. "What's the little devil doing here this time of night, anyway?"
Vimes turned his head. There was a skinny, wizened-looking man standing in the doorway, bearded and as bald as a baby. He was grinning stupidly and holding a broom.
"He's cheap, sir, and it's best if he comes in when it's quiet," Snouty murmured, grabbing the little man by a stick-thin elbow. "Come on, out you get, Mr. Lousy." So now the crossbow wasn't pointing at Vimes, and he had several pounds of metal on his wrists, or, to put it another way, his arms were a hammer. He went to stand up. Vimes woke up and stared at the ceiling. There was a deep rumbling somewhere nearby. Treadmill? Watermill? It was going to be a corny line, but some things you had to know. "Where am I?" he said, and then he added, "this time." "Well done," said a voice somewhere behind him. "Consciousness to sarcasm in 5 seconds.
The room was large by the feel of the air, and the play of light on the walls suggested there were candles alight behind Vimes. The voice said,
"I'd like you to think of me as a friend."
"A friend? Why?" said Vimes. There was a smell of cigarette smoke in the air.
"Everyone ought to have a friend," said the voice.
"Ah, I see you've noticed you're still handcuffed." The voice said this because in one movement Vimes had swung himself off the table and plunged forward. Vimes woke up and stared at the ceiling. There was a deep rumbling somewhere nearby. Treadmill? Watermill? Then his thoughts knotted themselves most unpleasantly. "What," he said, "just happened?" "I just thought you might like to try that again, lad," said the invisible friend. "We have little tricks here, as you will learn. Just sit up. I know you've been through a lot, but we don't have time for messing about. This is sooner than I'd like, but I thought I'd better get you out of there before it went really runny, Mr. Vimes." Vimes froze. "Who are you?" he said. "It's Lutze, officially, Mr. Vimes, but you can call me Sweeper, since we're friends." Vimes sat up carefully and looked around. The shadowy walls were covered with writing. It must be writing, he thought, but the Hubland type of writing which is only one step away from being little pictures. The candle was standing in a saucer. Somewhere behind it, just visible in the shadows, were 2 cylinders, each as wide as a man and twice as long, set in massive horizontal bearings, one above the other. Both were turning slowly, and both gave the impression of being a lot bigger than their mere dimensions suggested. Their rumble filled the room. There was a strange violet haze around them. 2 yellow-robed figures tended the cylinders, but Vimes's eye was drawn to the skinny little bald man sitting on an upturned crate by the candle. He was smoking a foul roll-up of the sort favoured by Nobby, and looked like a foreign monk. In fact, he looked exactly the kind Vimes occasionally saw with begging bowls in the street. "You're looking fit, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper. "You were in the watch-house, right?" said Vimes. "Snouty called you lousy." Yes, Mr. Vimes, Lutze. I've been sweeping up there every night for the past 10 years, all for 2p and all the kicks I can't dodge, just waiting for you." "And you told Rosie Palm where I'd gone too. You were the monk on the bridge." "Right again. Couldn't be sure she'd catch up." "How do you know who I am?" "Don't get excited, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper calmly. "I'm here to help you, Your Grace. And I'm your friend because right now I'm the only person in the world who will probably believe anything you tell me about, thunderstorms and falls, that sort of thing. At least," he added, "the only sane person." He watched Vimes as the man sat quite still for half a minute. "Good, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper. "Thinking. I like that in a man." "This is magic, right?" said Vimes at last. "Something like that, yes," said Sweeper. "For instance, just now we moved you back in time just a few seconds, just so you wouldn't do anything you'd regret. Can't say I blame you for wanting to have a go at someone after all you've been through, but we don't want any harm to come to you, do we?" "Ha! I almost had my hands round your throat." Sweeper smiled. It was a disarmingly little smile. "Smoke?" he said. He fumbled in his robe and produced a ragged hand-rolled cigarette. "Thanks, but I've got my own," Vimes began automatically. His hand stopped halfway to his pocket. "Oh, yes," said Sweeper. "The silver cigar case. Sybil gave it to you as a wedding present, right? Shame about that." "I want to go home," said Vimes. It came out as a whisper. He hadn't been sleeping in the past 12 hours, merely recovering. This time it was Sweeper who sat in silence, apart from the rumble of the cylinders. "You're a policeman, Mr. Vimes," he said eventually. "Well, I'd like you to believe, for a while, that I'm a sort of policeman too, all right? Me and my colleagues, we see that things happen or don't happen. Don't ask questions right now, just nod." Vimes shrugged instead. "Good. And let's say on our patrol we found you, as it might be, in a metaphorical kind of way, lying in the gutter on a Saturday night singing a rude song about wheelbarrows. I don't know a rude song about wheelbarrows. Sweeper sighed. Hedgehogs, custard, one-string fiddles, it really doesn't matter. Now, we've found you a long way from where you should be, and we'd like to get you home, but it's not as easy as you might think. I've gone back in time, haven't I? It was that bloody library. Everyone knows the magic in there makes strange things happen. Well, yes, it was mainly that, yes. It's more true to say that you, got caught up in a major event. Can anyone get me back? Can you get me back? Well, said Sweeper, looking awkward. Wizards can if you can't, said Vimes. I'll go and see them in the morning. Oh, you will you? I'd like to be there when you do. These ain't the wizards under decent old Redcully, you know, and you're not His Grace Commander Sir Samuel Vimes neither. You're a rough-looking devil who'll be burbling a story about thunderstorms and flying through time to a bunch of rather devious and unpleasant men. You'll be lucky if they only laugh at you. Anyway, even if they wanted to be helpful, they'd hit the same problem. And what's that? It can't be done. Not yet. For the first time in the conversation, Sweeper looked ill at ease. The big problem I'm facing, Mr. Vimes, is that I ought to tell you a few things that I'm not, in any circumstances, allowed to tell you. But you're a man who isn't happy until he knows the facts. I respect that. So, if I tell you everything, can you spare me, 20 minutes of your time? It could save your life. All right, said Vimes. But what? You've got a bargain, said Sweeper. Roll on, boys. The noise of the big cylinders changed for a moment, and Vimes felt a very slight shock, a suggestion that his whole body had just gone plib. 20 minutes, said Sweeper. I'll answer every question, and then, Mr. Vimes, we'll have a little chat and send you back from 20 minutes in the future to now, and you'll tell yourself what you and me agree you ought to know, which will be most of it, really. You're a man who can keep secrets, okay? Yeah, but... Vimes began. The tone of the spinning cylinders changed slightly. Sam Vimes saw himself standing in the middle of the room. That's me! Yeah, right, said Sweeper. Now listen to the man. Hello, Sam, said the other Vimes, staring not quite at him. I can't see you, but they say you can see me. Remember the smell of lilac? You thought about those who died, and then you told Willikins to hose down that kid, and you've got a pain in your chest and you're a bit worried about it, but you haven't told anyone. That's about enough, I think. You know I'm you. Now, there's some things I can't tell you. I can know them because I'm in a... The speaker stopped and looked away, as if he was taking instruction from someone off stage. A closed loop. You could say I'm 20 minutes of your life you don't recall. Remember when you had a sensation that his whole body had just gone plib? Sweeper stood up. I hate to do this, he said, but we're in the temple and we can pretty much dampen out the paradoxes. On your feet, Mr. Vimes, I'm going to tell you everything. You just said you couldn't. Sweeper smiled. Need any help with those handcuffs? What? These old capstick mark ones? No, just give me a nail in a couple of minutes. How come I'm in a temple? I brought you here. You carried me? No, you walked with me. Blindfolded, of course, and then when you were here, I gave you a little drink. I don't remember that. Of course not. That was the purpose of the drink. Not very mystical, but it does the job. We don't want you coming back here, now do we? This place is supposed to be a secret. You messed up my memory. Now, you see here. Vimes half stood, but Sweeper held up his hands placatingly. Don't worry. It just made you forget a few minutes, he said. How many minutes? Just a few. And it had herbs in it. Good for you, herbs. And then we let you sleep. Don't worry. No one is after us. They'll never know you've gone. See these things here? Sweeper picked up an openwork box that lay beside his chair. It had a strap like a knapsack, and Vimes could just see a cylinder inside the box. "This is called a procrastinator," said the monk. "And it's a tiny version of the ones over there, the ones that look like your granny's mangle. I'm not going to get technical, but when it's spinning, it moves time around you. Did you understand what I just said?" "No." "All right. It's a magic box. Happier?" "Go on," said Vimes grimly. "You wore one of these, and I led you here from the watch house. Because you were wearing it, you were, shall we say, outside time. And after we've had this little talk, I'll take you back to the watch house, and the old captain won't know any difference. No time is passing in the outside world while we're in the temple. The procrastinators take care of that. Like I said, they move time around. Actually, what's really happening is that they are moving us back in time at the same time that time moves us forward. We've got others around the place. Good for keeping food fresh. What else can I tell you? Oh yeah, it helps keep track if you just think of things happening one after another, believe me." "This is like a dream," said Vimes. There was a clink as the handcuffs sprang open. "Yes, it is, isn't it?" said Sweeper calmly. "And can your magic box take me home? Move me in time all the way to where I ought to be? This? Ha! No, this is strictly for small-scale stuff." "Look, Mr. Sweeper, I've spent the last day fighting a right bastard on a roof and getting beaten up twice and sewn up once and stitched up too. I've got the impression I should be thanking you for something, but I'm damned if I know what it is. What I want is straight answers, mister. I'm the commander of the watch in this city." "Don't you mean you will be?" said Sweeper. "No. You told me it helps if I think of things happening one after another. Well, yesterday, I was commander of the watch, and I bloody well still am the commander of the watch. I don't care what anyone else thinks. They are not in possession of all the facts." "Hold on to that thought," said Sweeper, standing up. "All right, Commander. You want some facts? Let's take a walk in the garden, shall we?" "Can you get me home?" "Not yet. It's my professional opinion that you're here for a reason." "A reason? I fell through the bloody dome." "That helped, yes. Calm down, Mr. Vimes. It's all been a great strain, I can see." Sweeper led the way out of the hall. There was a big office outside, a hubbub of quiet but purposeful activity. Here and there, among the worn and scratched desks, there were more cylinders like the ones Vimes had seen in the other chamber. Some of them were turning slowly. "Very busy, our Ankh-Morpork section," said Sweeper. "We had to buy the shops on either side." He picked up a scroll from a basket by one desk, glanced at the contents, and tossed it back with a sigh. "And everyone's overworked," he added. "We're here at all hours, and when we say all hours, we know what we're talking about." "But what is it you do?" said Vimes. "We see that things happen." "Don't things happen anyway?" "Depends what things you want. We are the monks of history, Mr. Vimes. We see that it happens." "I've never heard of you, and I know this city like the back of my hand." "Right. And how often do you really look at the back of your hand, Mr. Vimes?" "We're in Clay Lane, to stop you wondering." "What? Those loony monks in the funny foreign building between the pawnbrokers and the shonky shop? The ones who go dancing round the street banging drums and shouting?" "Well done, Mr. Vimes. It's funny how secretly you can move when you're a loony monk dancing through the streets banging a drum." "When I was a kid, most of my clothes came from the shonky shop in Clay Lane," said Vimes. "Everyone we knew got their clothes from the shonky shop. Used to be run by a foreign guy with a funny name. Brother Soonshine Sun," said Sweeper. "Not a hugely enlightened operative, but a genius when it comes to pricing fourth-hand schmutter. Shirts so worn you could see daylight through 'em, and trousers as shiny as glass," said Vimes. "And by the end of the week, half the stuff was in the pawn shop." "That's right," said Sweeper. "You'd pawn your clothes in a pawn shop, but you'd never buy clothes from the pawn shop, 'cause there were standards, right?" Vimes nodded. When you got right down to the bottom of the ladder, the rungs were very close together, and oh my, weren't the women careful about them. In their own way, they were as haughty as any duchess. You might not have much, but you could have standards. Clothes might be cheap and old, but at least they could be scrubbed. There might be nothing behind the front door worth stealing, but at least the doorstep could be clean enough to eat your dinner off, if you could have afforded dinner. And no one ever bought their clothes from the pawn shop. You'd hit bottom when you did that. No, you bought them from Mr. Sun at the shonky shop, and you never asked where he got them from. I went to me first proper job in a suit from the shonky shop, he said. Seems like centuries ago now. No, said Sweeper. It was only last week. Silence ballooned. The only sound was the purr of the cylinders dotted around the room. Then Sweeper added, It must have occurred to you. Why? I've spent most of the time here being beaten up or unconscious or trying to get home. You mean I'm out there somewhere? Oh, yes. In fact, last night you saved the day for your squad by aiming a crossbow at a dangerous miscreant who was attacking your sergeant. The silence ballooned larger this time. It seemed to fill the universe. Eventually, Vimes said, No, that's not right. That never happened. I would have remembered that, and I can remember a lot about my first weeks in the job. Interesting, isn't it? Said Sweeper. But is it not written? There's a lot goes on we don't get told. Mr. Vimes, you need a short spell in the garden of inner city tranquility.